The sun rose slowly over the vast Pacific, casting pale gold across the decks of the USS Enterprise. Young radioman Jack Turner, barely 20, tightened the straps of his headset as the carrier engines growled beneath him. For months, the United States Navy had been pushed back, island after island falling to the relentless Imperial Japanese Navy. But now something felt different. Rumors whispered through the ship like electricity. "We know their plan. We're ready this time." Across the ocean, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's mighty armada advanced toward Midway Atoll. 4 fleet carriers, battleships, cruisers, and hundreds of aircraft. Japan expected an easy victory, a final blow to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet. What they didn't know was that American codebreakers had cracked their communications. The U.S. knew exactly where the Japanese would strike. On June 4, 1942, shortly after dawn, the first wave of Japanese aircraft roared over Midway. Bombs rained down on the island as American Marines fired back fiercely from the bunkers. Smoke rose into the sky, and the defenders knew they were buying precious minutes, time the carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown desperately needed. From the deck of the Enterprise, Jack heard the launch order echo across the flight deck. "Hornet torpedo squadrons, launch! Enterprise dive bombers, prepare for takeoff!" The skies filled with American fighters and bombers heading toward the Japanese fleet, but for the torpedo squadrons, fate was merciless. Flying low and slow, they were torn apart by Japanese Zero fighters. Squadron after squadron fell, nearly every man lost. Yet their sacrifice forced the Japanese carriers to maneuver wildly, keeping their decks cluttered, their defenses scattered. And that was when everything changed. High above the clouds, unnoticed, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey and his dive bombers spotted the Japanese carriers turning into the wind. Below them lay the Kaga, Akagi, and Soryu, their decks loaded with fuel hoses, bombs, and half-prepared aircraft. McCluskey shouted into his radio, "All planes, attack!" The dive bombers dropped like hawks. The first bomb slammed into the Kaga, igniting her flight deck in a roaring inferno. The Akagi erupted moments later, flames racing across the ship as sailors scrambled in panic. The Soryu was struck next, explosions tearing her apart. 3 Japanese carriers were burning within minutes. Jack Turner could only listen to the radio chatter, the static, the cheers, the disbelief. The impossible had happened. But the battle wasn't over. The last Japanese carrier, the Hiryu, launched a desperate counterstrike, severely damaging the USS Yorktown. Sailors fought through smoke and fire, refusing to abandon ship. Yet even the Hiryu could not escape fate. American aircraft found her that evening, and within hours she too was burning. By nightfall on June 4th, the once invincible Japanese strike force lay shattered. 4 carriers lost. Dozens of elite pilots gone. The balance of the Pacific forever altered. On the deck of the Enterprise, Jack watched the sunset burn red over the waves. The sky seemed to glow with the memory of all who had fallen, Americans and Japanese alike. The war was far from over, but for the first time since Pearl Harbor, hope returned to the men of the Pacific Fleet. The tide had turned. Midway was not just a victory, it was the beginning of a new era. When dawn rose on June 5th, the Pacific Ocean was strangely calm. The smoke from burning carriers drifted across the waves like a ghostly reminder of the previous day's fury. On board the USS Enterprise, Jack Turner gripped the railing, staring at the horizon. The sea looked peaceful, but Jack knew the world had changed forever. The American fleet remained on high alert. Though the Japanese carriers were gone, no one knew if more enemy ships lurked beyond the curtain of mist and cloud. Admiral Raymond Spruance, calculating and determined, ordered the task force deeper into the ocean to hunt down the retreating Japanese. Below deck, mechanics worked tirelessly, patching bullet holes and refueling aircraft. Pilots slept where they could, on the floor, on crates, even sitting upright against bulkheads. They were exhausted, but something fierce burned inside them. The realization that they had survived the impossible. That afternoon, the order came. Air groups prepared to launch. "We found the enemy cruisers," Jack looked out as the dive bombers soared into the sky once more. The engines roared like thunder, the wind sweeping across the deck as if pushing the men toward destiny. Hours later, triumphant voices crackled over the radio. Direct hits! Enemy cruisers Mikuma and Mogami attacked! Mikuma burning! Jack exhaled. Each victory meant fewer ships Japan could throw into the war. Japan's navy had been the pride of its empire, a flawless, undefeated machine. Now it was bleeding. A message from the enemy. Far across the ocean, aboard a Japanese rescue vessel, Captain Kiyoshi Arima watched the battered survivors of the carrier Akagi being pulled from the water. Some were burned, others stunned into silence. They had believed in the invincibility of their fleet. Midway shattered that illusion. One surviving pilot whispered, "How did the Americans know? How did they find us?" Captain Arima had no answer. No one did. Only later would Japan learn the truth. The Americans had broken their codes. Yet even in defeat, there was dignity. Arima stood at attention as the sun set over the ruins of the once mighty carrier. He bowed his head. "We lost the battle, but we must not lose ourselves." Back on Midway Atoll. Midway itself was a graveyard of broken planes, twisted metal, and craters of smoldering sand. Marines walked silently among the ruins. Chaplains held quick ceremonies for the fallen while medics treated the wounded. In a small bunker, radio operator Emily Hayes, one of the few women stationed on Midway, finally allowed herself to rest. For 2 days she had worked without sleep, relaying messages, encoding instructions, warning commanders of incoming waves. Now, with victory secured, she closed her eyes and whispered, "We did it! Against all odds, we did it!" Jack Turner's reflection. That night aboard the Enterprise, Jack wrote a letter to his mother. "Mom, I saw bravery I never imagined. Men flew into storms of bullets just so others might survive. We lost so many, but their sacrifice saved the Pacific. I think the world will remember Midway long after we are gone." He folded the letter and tucked it into his jacket. Then he looked out across the moonlit sea. The war stretched ahead, long, brutal, uncertain. But now, for the first time since Pearl Harbor, the Americans were no longer running. They were standing their ground. And one day, they would push forward. Midway was not the end. It was the beginning of the counterattack, the spark that would lead to Guadalcanal, the island-hopping campaigns, and eventually, the gates of Japan itself. Jack Turner didn't know where he would be tomorrow. But he knew this. The United States Navy had turned the tide. And history would never forget it.